I once talked to a woman, just a perfectly ordinary, nice LOL, little old lady. And she told me about she'd had an accident in an elevator, and she'd broken her leg and got stuck under the elevator. And she was there for half an hour before anybody could get to her. And she said in that moment she realized that in this whole universe there was not one single grain of sand that was out of place. And that is a curious vision that comes to people occasionally. When you see suddenly that you've been looking at things in absolutely the wrong way. And it's really weird. You daren't talk to other people after this because you'll be so misunderstood. But you see that the most frightful things that can possibly happen fit in with this. It's very strange and very odd. But the reason is, of course, you see, that when you get rid of the idea of the governor and the governed, the boss and the employee, the king and the subject, there aren't any victims. Every creature that suffers in this world is, unbeknownst perhaps to itself, doing it to itself. No one else is responsible. There are no victims. Because the whole thing is a unity. It is of itself so. Everything is of itself so. No one to blame. So you see, when nowadays when a child is a juvenile delinquent, and people come around, the social workers and the police, and say, now look here, this is terrible. The child has learned a little psychoanalysis and can say, well, it was my parents' fault because they brought me up in a traumatic way. And they got divorced, or my father was a drunkard and my mother was a prostitute, and what can you expect? So then the public says, well, we should get after the parents. Well, then the parents say, because they've learned a little Freud, it wasn't our fault, but it was our parents were neurotic too. And so you see, you pass the buck back, just as in the story of Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, when Adam was accused of having something wrong with him, when the Lord God saw him after eating the fruit, he said, this woman that thou gavest me, she tempted me and I did eat. And God looked at the woman and said, well now, what about it? And she said, the serpent tempted me. And God looked at the serpent and nobody said anything. No, the serpent didn't pass the buck. He didn't make any excuses because he knew. And, but in this way, you see, one passes the buck back all the time. And says, it wasn't me, I just got involved in this because you, my father, and were messing around with my mother, and you went too far, and now you've got a baby. It isn't my fault. That's a terribly irresponsible attitude. See, because you must recognize that you were your father's own desire. That was you, that glint in his eye. And that you go back. Imagine an explosion. Supposing I make a splosh of ink against a thing, and you see from the center, all this spray flows out. And so way back in the beginning of time, maybe, according to Fred Hoyle, there was a colossal explosion which threw out all the galaxies. And as the explosion goes out, the spray gets finer and finer and finer and finer, and you'd look at it as all one thing. It's reaching out like you would spread your fingers like that. And you, every one of you, are little reach-outs on the end of that big explosion. And you see, you go right back to the beginning. Your bodies are the most ancient things that there are. It goes like that. Yeah, it takes millions of years to go splat. But you're in it right there, you see, and you did it. Right in the beginning, you blew this thing up. Self-so. Everything happens of itself. It's a very interesting experiment to let sound come to your ears. Now, why don't you try this? Why don't you all just close your eyes? And gently become aware of the whole world of sound around you, in you. Don't try to identify the sounds and put names on them. Just let them happen. Don't feel that you mustn't make any sounds like belly rumbles, hiccups, coughing, so on. That's all perfectly part of the scene. Just for a moment, let all sound happen. Even when I talk, don't make any sense of what I'm saying. Just sound. You should listen like that before you go to sleep at night. And realize that you live in a magical, musical continuum all the time. But you see, ordinarily, we keep trying to correct what we're listening to. Pay attention to this, ignore that. Say to the children, shut up! I can't hear myself thinking, you see. But if you really know how to listen, you can concentrate on anything you want to in the middle of a complete pandemonium. But so in the same way, one could give experimental exercises in listening, in using your eyes, in tasting, in feeling things, for example, picking up rocks and feeling them, because all this is letting yourself function, just in the same way as I was discussing yesterday, letting your brain give you answers, because this is an act of faith in one's own being. It is allowing the body to be a democracy instead of a tyranny, or shall we say a republic. There's a certain difference between a republic and a democracy. A republic is rather more efficiently respectable. So when you allow the body, in other words, to do what it will do, then you say, well, it will do it for me, will it? No, wait a minute. Who are you? Just as the Tao itself is not something other than the universe, not a boss over it, you aren't something other than this design, which is not just the body, but the body and all its relationships to the universe. You don't stand apart from that. You don't have it. You're not in a situation where there's a kind of inspector, which is you, which watches everything that goes by, like you were watching the traffic go by on the street. But we think we are that, and indeed seem to have a positive sensation of being the inspector who watches all this happen. Partly because of memory, which seems to give an impression that one is a static mirror, you see, which reflects everything that goes by. We get this from remembering. And on the other hand, we get it because we are trying to fight change and resist it. You see, we're resisting all the time. If you were physically aware of all your muscular reactions, you would find you were going around most of the day doing this, fighting something. You can get a person to lie on the ground and say, now look, you're completely supported by the floor. You won't fall down, so let go. But it's very difficult for people because they're afraid that if they don't hold themselves together, they will turn into a nasty goo that will all fall apart and drip through the floor. So everybody is trying to use their skin and their muscles to hold themselves together, but it'll all take care of itself. You won't fall apart. So there's a constant resistance going on, and that resistance is experienced, you can be aware of it in terms of a sense of strain here between the eyes. This is its center. And that constant resistance to life And the sensation of it is what you actually feel when you think about yourself. I is that feeling of resistance. Now, if you let go, there is no necessity whatsoever for an inspector who watches everything that happens. You are what you experience. Your experience and you are the same. Your thoughts are you, your feelings are you. So there's no necessity whatsoever to try and stand aside from them and be standoffish and say, you go away. So, if you can trust yourself, in other words, to the flow of what's going on, you won't need to resist it. And you'll find it works very well, just as your eyes work well when you don't try to force them. Just as the clothes are comfortable when you become unaware of them. Now, this isn't the same as numbness, you see. It's quite different. Because you experience your body in terms of what you ordinarily call everything else. In other words, as you look around here, we are taught to think, what I am looking at is out there. Now imagine this. Look. What's the color of your head from the standpoint of your own vision? Of your head?
Nothing.
Yeah. Nothing? Now watch. It certainly isn't black, is it, behind your eyes? You don't have a sensation of blackness, nor of whiteness. There seems to be nothing there at all, as if you had no head from your own point of view. But actually, what it is, how it looks inside your head, is what you're seeing out here. Because you see, the optical nerves are back here. And your experience of all the shapes and colors around you is a sensation of the state of your brain. So what you're looking at is inside your head. But then you can't be said to be looking at it because inside your head is you. So all this is how you feel. This is you. Only it's true for each person. It's not more specially, you are not more specially me than I am you. It's mutual. It's like the dewdrops on the spider's web reflecting one another. So it is this, then, this letting your mind work by itself, letting your eyes see for themselves, that is the preliminary to naturalness in the way that Taoists understand it. Now, let's go on from there to see how they express naturalness. They use two images. One is called the uncarved block, and the other unbleached silk. And these two images lie at the root of all those great art forms of the Far East that are associated with Taoism and Zen Buddhism. And I'm going to show you the tea ceremony after this, because that is the best possible demonstration of this particular mood, because it combines. It is what you might call the art of the controlled accident, because it combines discipline with spontaneity. The point of the uncarved block is this. Do you know there's a Japanese art called bonseki, which is the cultivation of stones. You might call it the art of growing stones. The Japanese national anthem says, "May our emperor reign 1,000 years, reign 10,000 years, until little stones grow into mighty rocks, thick velveted with ancient moss." So there's the idea, first of all, that a stone is alive. Next, there is a love of stones in their natural shape. I have a huge series of slides that I took in Japan of nothing but stones in gardens. And they have a genius for the selection of marvelous stones. They like stones that you will find in a river, which have been worked on with the water until they look almost like clouds. And they'll take one of these stones and hitch it up on a mule cart and bring it down. And then instead of just dumping it in the garden and patching some moss on it, they'll take it away to a corner where it's in the damp and it'll grow moss naturally. In Japan, moss grows quite quickly, naturally. When the moss has grown naturally on the stone, they move it into the place where they wanted it exactly in the garden. And then they arrange sand round it in such a way that it looks as if it had always been there. You cannot, you see, there is nothing that's not natural. Nothing at all. The idea that there is something artificial is a completely artificial idea. Because a skyscraper is really as natural as a bird's nest. But how to demonstrate naturalness? You see, it's like what is called in mathematics an asymptotic curve. That is a curve that approaches the axis of a straight line. Here's the straight line. Now, here's a curve going to the straight line. It's always getting nearer, but never touches it. What we call approximation. So the idea is to make a skillful approximation to the natural. But if it were just natural and only natural, it wouldn't call attention to what it's doing. It wouldn't point it out. And so the idea of the artist then is when he makes a bowl or selects a rock and puts it in place, is that the bowl should get the bowl and the rock should get the rock. They should look so much like, well, that rock you were always looking for. So then, this other word I mentioned that is si, unbleached silk. You know how nice unbleached silk is, what we call natural color, especially when you get shantang, which has a sort of texture in it. And it has a sort of, I tell you what is the equivalent in our culture is burlap. Especially the smell of it. And burlap with nubbles in it, and bits of straw. There's a wonderful feeling about that, which is what is meant by si. It's primitive, yes, but marvelous. When, I'll tell you more about this later, but the point is, when the great masters of Taoist and Zen Buddhist art got their minds uncluttered and working properly, they suddenly discovered that some of the simplest things of everyday life, simple utensils that were used in the kitchen, the cheapest rice bowls that might be used by a peasant, were extraordinarily beautiful. They were unsophisticated. They were natural. In the same sense we have when a child, age 3, starts dancing. There's no self-consciousness, no playing to the gallery, nothing. The child is just dancing. That's naturalness. Now the question is, you see, for the adult who's all fouled up, how to recapture that. And this is what the greatest artists sweat blood trying to do. To make their work look as if it had happened by itself, as if it had just grown there. Now, there are exceptions to this, but the exceptions prove the rule. Beethoven, in some of his sonatas, arranged the fingering to be as unnatural and difficult as possible, so as to achieve the impression in the playing of immense effort. But that's the exception that proves the rule. In the ordinary way, the expert musician seems to be using no effort at all. It just happens through his fingers. But if he wants to portray effort for some artistic reason, then this sort of trickery is introduced. But the artist works and works and works all his life long to become again as a child, to regain original innocence and naturalness. But you see what happens through that work. In doing the work, the artist becomes the master of a tremendously sophisticated technique. He knows exactly how to control his hand, his brush, his paints, his chisels, whatever he's using. But however much you know how to say something, how to express something, that doesn't necessarily give you something to express and something to say. You can be a master of the English language and yet only have boring ideas. So then somehow you have to put your technique at the disposal of what we call inspiration. That means the Holy Spirit. And so in the same way, the artist who practices for years and years and years with his brush in the Chinese way, in the end finds that he cannot, by any stratagem of his own, by any technique or any cleverness, he cannot paint. And he has to give up. And then it happens. Well, this, you see then, is what lies behind what we can definitely recognize as the naturalistic art of the Far East. Now, I hope you know what I'm talking about, because there are very, very different kinds of Far Eastern art. For example, the finest pottery of the Sung dynasty, which will take us back to 1000 AD, is completely unlike what most people think of as Chinese porcelain. Chinese porcelain, one thinks of white, eggshell-like stuff with very delicate designs of birds and butterflies and fine ladies and children playing battledore and shuttlecock. But the finest Sung is heavy, jade green, soft, very self-effacing in a way. And it has a certain roughness. Or take Japanese so-called raku ware. Here, there is a bowl, we shall see some, which is definitely handmade. It looks as if it wasn't even put on a wheel. And the glaze is allowed to drool. And the bottom of the bowl, the clay, has been left exposed. But you see, that coloration reminds those artists of autumn. And they want to see that it is clay, because a good potter does not force clay to obey his preconceived ideas. He evokes the spirit in the clay to do some magic. So then, because the clay did that, these artists love the clay. They don't want to make the clay look like something else, like ivory. They want it to look like clay. So with clothes, these clothes. So with everything. Wood. Wood is loved by such artists. They love the grain in wood, and therefore deplore paint. Lacquer is another thing. It's used sparingly. But by and large, wood is beautiful. And you get floor like this, you see. Well, the nice thing about this floor is you can see it's wood. You can see the grain. Some of you may have been to the Katsura Palace in Kyoto, where they have verandas with the most gorgeous grained wood you ever saw in your life. It is simply enchanting. I mean, it's like looking at some vision, and you think you're going to go out of your mind looking at this grain. Gorgeous stuff. And so in the same way, in the typical Japanese house, by the edge of the alcove, called the tokonoma, there is almost invariably a wooden pillar which is made from an unplaned tree trunk or branch, so that you still see the knots in it and the curves, and sometimes they get, I think, some rather exaggerated ones that are absurdly nubbly. But in the same way that we today have learned to like driftwood, that is a thing in line with this Taoist spirit, that we appreciate wood as wood and don't try to make it look like marble or metal or something else. The same is true with paper. The Chinese don't like our paper. They say it has no character. They like paper with little threads in them and with a texture to it. And they feel that that really is paper. The paper gets the paper. And so feel that our paper is some sort of plastic, a non-substance. And we are in danger of being engulfed by this through not having love for the uncarved block and the unbleached silk, which are fundamental, substantial, and natural.